Welcome back to Mental Health Monday. Let's get straight back into our conversation with Carrie Carlisle, author of the book Shut Up Alcohol, which is available now. There is a link in the podcast notes to that. We continued our conversation, moving on from the details of the book into the wider issue of the normalisation of drinking and just how many people in the country drink just a little bit too much.
Well, I have a background in American sports, not playing. Good grief, I'm built for comfort, not speed. But I'm stats. I'm all about, I can't add very well, but I like stats. And there's a strange stat. I think it's in Adrian Chetler's book, actually. And if you've read The Good Drinker, I think it's in his book. And he hits the nail on the head there. He says that if you look at the actual statistics for what they are, there's about 5% of the population that drink well over the allocated units that they should do, like 50 units plus. There's a 5% of the population that do that, and they're not even functional alcoholics. And, that's end-stage alcoholism. That's only 5% of the population. Then we go to, there's 30% of people who drink more than the recommended amount every week, which is like, 14 units or something. Units are ridiculous, but that's 30%. So really, even if you've got 35% there, the rest of the nation do drink within those levels. Like, they drink the recommended amount. So it's not even half the nation that just go pure mental and overboard. It's way less than that. So is it just that the ones who do drink a lot are very vocal about it? And yeah, hell yeah, they are. I know this because when I was a very heavy drinker by my standards, and I probably was the heaviest out of most of the people that I knew, I needed you to stay there and keep drinking or normalise my drinking. I'm going to tell you for a fact that my drinking's fine. And because I'm quite a strong character, you're going to get on board or just shut up. And whoever you're talking about, that's quite a strong character. So you do get on board or shut up because no one's challenged them. There's a reason they don't know that that's not normal. And that's because their entire life is this kind of echo chamber, but a really niche echo chamber. Also, just because something's not common doesn't mean it's normal. It's common for 30% of the nation to drink insane amounts of alcohol. It's not normal, though. And as life goes on and on and on with social media, and social media's got a lot to do with it. Filtering is a huge thing when it comes to drinking or not drinking. They only mix with that 30%. So that tiny niche that it is normal for. And then within the 5%, they don't mix with anyone really, because it's a very isolating condition. So it's actually, it's not as common as we think. It's just the ones that do it are more vocal and they'll tell you it's fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but do you think the awareness of those levels, you talked about, units and things like that, like, are people going, oh, well, I've had my, are the 65% of people, are they going, no, I had my 14 units now, so I will stop? Or is it that their lifestyles don't involve alcohol, or some of them children or whatever? Though equally, those one in 3, the 35%, are they going out of their way knowing that they're drinking too much? Or are they drinking what they perceive to be normal levels, but actually may find out in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 15 years' time, that they've actually built up a load of issues for themselves because they weren't aware that the amount they were drinking was actually so. And I think Adrian has talked about this in the past, where he even considered himself not to be an alcoholic because he thought that him going out for 4 pints before a match, going to a football match, then coming out and having 8 pints, he thought that was normal. So he would have lived that life until the moment at 55 where he's liver packed in, and then he'd have gone, well, I've just drunk the same as I've always drunk. I've drunk as much as my dad drunk before me, and my friends drunk. There's an issue around that society doesn't know these rules, because the units thing doesn't really stack up, because what's a wine and what's a small wine and what's a large wine? None of that stacks. I think there's so many more people are in that maybe more damaging drinking than realise.
Absolutely. Like, first and foremost, everything that you said is true, because everything is true. Everyone has a personal truth, and it's a very flexible thing. There's no facts, really, apart from medical facts, which we all get slapped with, unfortunately, in the end. But when it comes to personal truth and personal opinion, of course, a lot of it's formed when we're younger and what we see, and then what we do for a living and who we mix with. There's just so many variables in there. But the units are confusing. They're boring. Like, again, it's probably Adrian's book again, where he talks about there's a reason they don't put them on the beer and wine in pubs. There's a reason they put units in a really, really tiny part that you've got to really squint at to look at on wine bottles. It's deliberately confusing because they don't want you to know how much you drink, that you stop spending money, and nobody wants us to stop spending money, like, until we die, and then they have to replace us with younger drinkers. But my truth was that I did not think that I had a problem. And however, my truth also was that I had a complicated relationship with alcohol. A lot of people have a complicated relationship with alcohol. You can put 3 people next to each other, and even if we did like the same gender, same race, whatever, stick them all together, we all have very individual relationships with alcohol. One person won't get a hangover. One person, like you say, won't see any consequences until 90% of their liver's shot. They just won't get those physical symptoms. They are happy with what they do. They actually have wider interests. That's the weird thing. They actually enjoy friendships. They have, you talked about going to see football. They have hobbies. They have, they have a functional life that works, and they have things. Alcohol, although they drink a lot, alcohol's not the center of their life. So that's not a complicated relationship with alcohol. That's someone who will say things like, never had a hangover that wasn't worth it. Love my life. I'm so happy. I'm so content with my lot. And they mean it. They're fine. Will they die? Yeah. Alcohol gets us all in the end. That's fine. So we'll put them over there because they don't have a complicated relationship with alcohol. Then there's someone like me who started fine and then started seeing the ramifications, panic attacks and, being incredibly physically ill. My relationships fell apart. I didn't want anything except alcohol. That's a really complicated relationship with alcohol because I needed it, but I couldn't have it. And the more and more and more complicated that gets, the smaller and smaller your will gets. Well, that's not just a physical problem. That's a psychological problem. That's the dysfunctional adult problem. And then there's someone over in the corner that will have had one bad experience and gone, right, that's not for me. Again, that's not a complicated relationship with alcohol, or they'll become indifferent to it, although they'll know their limits instinctively. So the 3 very the same people that have had relationships and experiences with alcohol have reacted in different ways. This one in the middle is the problem. Even though this one in the end, things aren't going to go well for them, I still have liver problems now. If I get sick now, 17 years since I drank dysfunctionally, and if you count drinking for the book, then 17 years, not straight that I haven't been drinking, but 3 months off for the book. If I get sick or give birth, which I, did twice in 2 years, my liver's the first thing that goes. You get jaundice. I'm not okay. Like there are physical ramifications for that. And there are a lot of dangerous drinkers, but they don't have a complicated relationship with alcohol. And that's what we've got to get the crux of. We can simplify that relationship. Super easy. You change your subconscious. Your subconscious doesn't have an opinion. It just takes instructions. So if we can change that subconscious, we can re-engineer your relationship with alcohol. Then your life gets bigger. Then there's less room for it anyway. Do you see what I mean? So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but...
Well, let me touch on that point there. So you talked about 17 years since alcohol, but part one of the conversation you talked about the fact that you don't count the days, if you like. But for some people, if you speak to someone who's got an alcohol problem, they've become sober, they're not a non-drinker.
Amazing, congratulations.
They will tell you, oh, I'm 1,384 days away from alcohol, and to my mind, that's them showing the growing distance that they have from the thing that caused them their most, difficult situations, problems and threats or whatever it will be. But you were saying that you don't have that you're trying to instead break that line to almost kind of say, it almost doesn't matter whether it was a week ago or 17 years ago. What matters is how I perceive the world now, almost like a more... in this moment, I don't drink and I don't want to drink and I'm not intending to have a drink. Can everyone learn that? Or do you understand why some people prefer the idea, it's almost like a mental notion, isn't it, of I am a physical distance away because so much time has passed. And actually, every single one of those days is a win, if you like.
Anyone that can stop drinking through willpower, hats off to them. And I say that every time I meet someone that has used a willpower method to stop drinking. It is so hard. It is so much work. Just incredible. Real congratulations, real respect for people that can do that, because I certainly couldn't, and I don't like things to be hard. I see no value in that. I don't need those sorts of accolades because I'm not brave and it wasn't difficult for me. That's okay. Prisoners count days, and I don't understand that. I like, where are we? What are we counting down to? Where are we going? Because we're not going to live forever. So there's that I don't really understand. And then the most important thing for me about this is, if we're stepping away, if those days, like you say, mean that you're further and further removed, I feel like we bring the alcohol with us because we're still taking center stage. This thing is so great and so powerful. I don't hear the distance. I hear, I've resisted for yet another minute or yet another day. And there's no freedom there from what I can see. It doesn't have to be that way. Until we moved house and I found a load of stuff in storage that I'd written down from like really, really early days of my journey, I'd forgotten what year I'd stopped drinking. I was like, was it 2015, 2005, 2006, 2007? It's one of them. Like, it's got to be one of them because I got sick so quickly after. But I didn't know, it wasn't relevant to me. And I tried counting days for the 6 weeks, tried the willpower method and failed and ended up a Wetherspoon, absolutely mortal. It's a sign that it's not working. It just feels to me like there's no real freedom there. Why are we still making, as the kids would say, alcohol the main character? Alcohol's not the main character. We're the main character. We're doing the stuff. So I feel like it's so... The most important thing about my book, really, 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 isn't the exercises that I give to make this stuff easy. Because that's okay. Like, you can practice and they're really easy. I could tell you them now and you could go do them. I don't want you to pay for the book to do the exercises. They're really simple. I just want people to understand why it's so difficult to do with the willpower way, and that it's not your fault. And that stuff like counting days, congratulations, but you're giving something up by doing it. You're giving a little bit of your power back, and it doesn't have to be that way. And if we just shut it off and go, that was then and now I'm indifferent, so what? It should feel no different to be a heavy drinker. And okay, I'll say this slowly because it's a little bit controversial. A heavy drinker that has a really uncomplicated relationship with alcohol shouldn't feel any different from someone who drinks a few units a week because they're indifferent to alcohol, to somebody who doesn't drink at all because they're indifferent to alcohol, because all three of these people are indifferent to alcohol. They've got really easy relationships, really basic, and alcohol does not take center stage in their life. So I am not doing anything harder than the person who is drinking a little bit or the person that's drinking a lot. We all should feel exactly the same way. And if we feel differently or feel like it's hard or feel like we're struggling, it's not working, whatever we're doing right now. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, although the consequences for those people are all a little bit different. There's someone might go, oh, I drink heavily, but I'm not facing negative consequences. That's, again, it's a point of opinion, isn't it? Whereas actually their wife or partner or children might actually go, you say that you're not facing any of the consequences, but the amount of time it takes up in your life takes you away from us. The consequences that you face with, hangovers or not feeling up to things or depressions that you maybe don't understand or diagnose, that actually they face the consequences potentially that somebody else doesn't think that they understand.
But that's boundaries. I mean, I will say it until the cows come home. There is no such thing as a nice drunk. There is no such thing as a nice person who abuses alcohol. The amount of neurological messing science that goes on there, the serotonin levels, like you say, the time and the money and the sociologically, on an interpersonal level, no, it's a disaster. Alcohol is a disaster. And if you consume a lot of it, of course, there's going to be medical consequences further down the line for different people dependent. And if you make more money, it's no different to that. Like if you make £5 an hour or if you make £15,000 an hour, yes, those consequences are going to be different. However, on a person-to-person relationship, inner relationship with alcohol, there are people who, and I say it in the book, honestly, like there are people who will never question their relationship and with alcohol, they'll die earlier, and their family, of course, are affected, and their friends are affected, but they still have a really easy relationship with alcohol. And as ever, it's up to the people around them, just like it would be with these people over here, to go, well, I don't know if that's acceptable for me or not. I'm going to decide that. I'm going to get my boundaries in. And you know what? You like it or you don't be here. So we can't do it for other people. And you know what? AA. Jodie's can't say AA. Why is she talking about EE? Nobody knows. Alcoholics Anonymous, they have that right. Like you can't, they have a lot of things right. They're, very well established, but you can't do this for anyone else. You can't. But what we seem to do is we pretend to change. And that's what I don't like, Mick. I don't like it when people used my method and pretended they were stopping drinking and actually were drinking less and controlling it successfully, but lying and isolating. What really scares me on a personal level is when you're authentic, let's go back to these three little people here, these people with uncomplicated relationships, like the lad at the barbecue, I drank 10 pints last night. There's no fraudulence there. A really easy relationship, there's no fraudulence. Fraudulence scares me because it leads to, well, it can lead to suicide. And, you know, we're not big fans of that, are we, Mick? So any sort of isolation and fraudulence and pretending to be something for other people, where we really reward putting on an act where alcohol is concerned in the UK. And we make, the more complicated that relationship is, the more we feel we've got to put different masks on. People are exhausted with that. And that's when it becomes dangerous.
I think so. I think that's really interesting. I think even though the person who will say, "Oh, I drank 10 pints," they'll almost, you know, sometimes there's that sort of like shots don't count mentality.
Oh, sure.
Where if there were like a few sambucas that were thrown into the mix, I think with a lot of people, there's still that self-denial. Oh no, I was, you know, it is the best example I can give. Guy goes out, 12 pints, goes for a curry, wakes up the next morning, he's just sick everywhere. What do they say? They say, "I must have had a bad pint," or there must have been something in that curry.
Mm-hmm.
They never go, "Yeah, I drank way too much." Like I think that's a culture that I know. Like with as a 41-year-old bloke now growing up in the northwest of England, I know that. Oh, must have had a bad. But yeah, I knew that pint we had in that pub. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was sick the following month. I'm thinking, you just drank 15 pints over a 7-hour period or 6-hour period, whatever it was. That's why you feel. And I think there is that sort of self-denial of, yeah, I know I probably drink too much, but I don't really want to say it.
But we can only meet people where they are. And everyone's not quite ready for everything all of the time. Very convoluted sentence. I'll try and explain further. There are some people that will have that moment of wake up, and they'll think like I did on that sitting on the floor of a house party, and this voice in my head that I was so used to shutting up, it got in there and said, "If you keep living like this, you're gonna die." And I actually responded to it emotionally and thought, "Oh my gosh, you're right." Like, oh, my brain actually said something smart instead of "let's go get another drink." So yeah, sometimes we have those moments. They're very few. They're very far between because life is busy and we're very good at distracting, and you pick up your phone and you scroll through it, but things will get in, and you'll find yourself gravitating towards maybe a program about a person who's drinking less, or watching a podcast, and your subconscious, although it only takes instruction, your brain takes in so much more information than we realize, doesn't it? What do we take in? Like 3% of what we see. We acknowledge 3% or whatever it is of what we see. Our brain takes in a lot of stuff, and it's trying to get through to us a lot of the time, but it's got to break through stuff like trauma. It's got to break through stuff like fear of change. It's got to break through all of these complicated stories that we tell ourselves, and the self-loathing and the guilt. It's got a lot of stuff to get through. So when it does get a little chink, there's always a little chink somewhere, gets in there and does the work. We're always trying to support ourselves a little bit. It's very hard to be kind to ourselves. Stopping drinking and keeping doing it. Stopping drinking is so easy. Like, you just pass out. I mean, I could achieve that on a nightly basis. Stopping drinking, it's really easy. Keeping doing it, slightly harder without the right guidance and support. But loving yourself is way harder than both of those things put together. Like having a nice relationship with yourself, that's really complicated. So people that have this low self-esteem, and addicts do, because healthy people don't hurt themselves. And we're talking about self-harm, aren't we, at the end of the day? There is so much more to unpack before we can be receptive enough. But little bits and pieces do get in. And these people that are very heavy drinkers, but don't have a problem with it. And like you say, it's been normal for them and their father and their father's father, because that's just who they are and where they're from. I get that. I really do get that. They don't care. They don't see it. It's not there. They're never going to listen to a podcast like this. It's just not for them. They've got other things going on. But the ones who do understand that they are interested and are too scared to know why yet, we just need to meet them where we are. And if reading something like my book, where you go, okay, well, I don't need you to do anything, but I just want you to know this is why it's hard. And they come back in 2 years' time, hopefully still alive, and they try something else. That's all we can do. We cannot force this down people's throats. you can't force your values on anyone. You can't force common sense on anyone. You've just kind of got to wait and be kind in the meantime. Being kind and being understanding isn't the same as enabling. It really isn't. Having boundaries is how that we get people to change on their own agenda. We can't, just because something's important to me doesn't mean that it's important to you. My husband drinks. And it's like the 1000th most interesting thing about him. It doesn't affect my relationship with alcohol in any way, shape or form. His relationship with alcohol goes up and down as life goes up and down, and as his mental health journey goes up and down. And I'm here and I'm solid, and it is irrelevant because he's still my person. If I'd looked at him and gone, this is my criteria, you can't ever drink ever again, I would have missed out on an amazing life with my soulmate. I refuse to elevate alcohol to a place that it doesn't belong, especially when I don't even drink it anymore.
I'll tell you about my moment with alcohol, and this is not, you'll probably laugh at this as an absolutely nothing moment.
No, I won't. And Mick.
No, that's true. No, that's true. That's true.
The crux of it. Everyone's story is relevant and it's true. Please carry on.
And it was, and I've never been a heavy drinker because I've never liked that sense of not being in control of, you know, if anyone was ever to say to me, what were you doing last night? And if I went, oh, actually, I don't know, I would be so mortified that I'd always rein back in and go, yeah, I need to stop now because after this moment, that's not to say I've not been drunk. Before my wife and I had our first child, I went out and I was well aware that like it was sort of like last chance saloon for the big nights out.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking, so I will have a big night out, but I was thinking during that night, you know what? I'm not going to be able to do this for much longer, so I'll carry on. And sort of gave up an element of that control, thinking, well, it's okay because there's going to be like a line drawn soon because fatherhood will kick in and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, I'll carry on. So I got drunk. Like I got drunk, and the next morning my wife woke up, and she don't mind me talking about this, but we had quite a serious bleed, you know, and when someone's pregnant, that can be a scary and frightening, very frightening thing, very upsetting. But I had been drinking the night before. And it was like 6, 7 o'clock the following morning. And it was like decision time. And I was thinking, well, I only got in at 2:30 this morning. And really, she needed to be in the hospital. Now, thankfully, everything was okay. It was it was just one of those things that sometimes happen in pregnancy. But I ended up ringing my dad and said, Dad, you need to get us up to the hospital. And at that point, I thought, oh, actually, that was me making a choice about alcohol, which was the wrong choice. And actually, what I needed to do was get back in my own box of control the controllables, like put yourself back in. And after that moment, I've always reined back from stick around for a couple of more. You'll have a couple of more. We're going to go on to the next one. To now where I go, no, I go home. And I'm very much of that opinion of the party never gets more interesting after 1 a.m. Like it rarely gets interesting after 10:30. So it's okay to leave. It's okay to go home. When you wake up tomorrow morning and you feel okay, that is a much better position to be in than for you to carry on drinking for another 4 hours, for not sleeping for another 4 hours, to then have to then pay that back the following day. And that was that moment for me where I was thinking, oh, actually, yeah, I would rather not drink and have that control. Know I can deal with things the next morning. Of course, then you have kids and you've got to deal with things the next morning, and it's breakfast and it's toilet stuff and it's nightmares and Dad, I can't sleep, or I need a drink, or I'm whatever at 3 o'clock in the morning. You got to deal with all that. I thought I can't do that with alcohol, or if I do that with alcohol, I lamp it all onto my partner and then expect her to then deal with it. And that for me was the moment with alcohol. I thought, actually, I would much rather now go and have a few drinks that I really enjoy, and then go home, rather than be lager boy.
The worst superhero ever. Here's the thing, because everything that you said is true. Of course it is. It's not only your truth, but it's pretty much universal truth. And there's no difference between, what's the difference between leaving at 1 a.m. or blacking out? Because either way, you're not there. So you're not experiencing anything. Physically, you're there, but, mentally, you're not there. So everything that you said is true and it's right. And what you're talking about is a trauma. That's a traumatic thing that happened to you guys. Like, you experienced this traumatic thing together, except that then you've got the complications of shock and guilt and all these like weird drinky feelings. Like the shame tries to creep in, the wardrobe monsters. So as my husband calls them. But But this is the crux of the matter. And this is where social conditioning comes in, because you've gone, oh, I did this. I'm sorry about this story. You didn't say that, but your countenance, everything about it. I'm really sorry, but this is a story that happened to me and it's not very dramatic. Number one, yeah, it is dramatic. Number two, own it like it's yours and it's true. And it was a huge pivotal moment that when your children reach that age where they start to explore alcohol, you can tell them like, oh, this is why actually. This is one of the reasons that I don't. And that'll be a real teachable moment for them, or for anyone really. Could you stand up at a party with the same comfort? I know there's somebody else in that story, so it's slightly more complicated. Could you stand up with the same conviction that 10 Pint Boy did, Lager Boy, and say that, oh, this is why I don't drink actually, because this is why I take it or leave it now. It was the domino effect for me that made me realize, no, that's not for me. Because if you stand up with confidence and say that, there's a lot of people that will be influenced. There's a lot of ripples that, how do we expect Lager Boy to change if nobody tells their story that's their norm, Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the thing where I think it's about relatability as well. And I think that's why it's interesting to hear so many different types of stories you hear around alcohol and people who've sort of stepped away from it, is because you then go, oh yeah, it's me that, or oh, that sounds a little bit like, and I think there's those elements that people only need to hear one little bit to give themselves permission to re-explore what it is they're doing. And like you said, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. It might be 2 years down the line that suddenly it just plants a seed, doesn't it, of...
That's all we have to do, ever. That's what you do all the time when you talk about mental health and you raise awareness. You're giving people an in a variety of different ways through different stories, and allowing people to tell their stories on your platform and share with them and be vulnerable too with them. We're just you give people enough ins, they'll take one of them, or it'll have a cumulative effect where they just chink, 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 and that's how the light gets in. You get enough chink, the light gets in, and then people can make change without feeling rushed, without feeling judged, The people around you that you love and support unconditionally, allowing them to grow at their own pace, there's a kind of grace to that. And we have to let them. There's no other choice. And I know that sometimes it's change or die, and people do die before they change, but you can't strong arm them anyway. It's so hard to accept, but we just can't. Doesn't mean we have to put up with their crappy behaviour though.
There is a link to Shut Up Alcohol in the podcast notes for Mental Health Monday. Carrie Carlisle, part 2. Thank you so much for your time once again. Really appreciate you joining us on the podcast. Congratulations on the book. Fascinating conversation. I'm sure it will spark many more. Thanks for joining us on Mental Health Monday.
Thank you, Mick.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.